In the vast silence between stars, where empires rise and fall like tides upon cosmic shores, there existed a truth that older civilizations held as absolute. Power speaks louder than words. For 10,000 cycles, this principle had governed the Galactic Consilium, a coalition of 7 ancient species who had carved the known galaxy into territories of influence, trade routes of unimaginable wealth, and hierarchies as rigid as neutron stars. But humanity had not received the manual. The Chamber of Infinite Echoes stood at the heart of the Consilium's central nexus, a space station so massive it had its own gravitational field. Crystalline walls stretched upward into architectural impossibility, refracting light from a dozen distant stars into cascading rainbows that danced across obsidian floors. This was where the powerful came to remind the powerless of their place. And today, the powerless were human. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the center of the circular chamber, her simple gray diplomatic suit a stark contrast to the flowing robes, bioluminescent armor, and energy-woven garments of the 7 species arrayed above her. They sat in tiered galleries that rose like judgment itself, looking always down upon the supplicant below. "The human presents her petition," announced the arbitrator, a Kellian whose 4 eyes never blinked in synchronization, creating an unsettling ripple effect across its angular face. Elena did not bow. She had learned early in her diplomatic career that among predator species, submission was not politeness, it was blood in the water. "Honored members of the Consilium," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, despite the acoustic design that made every word echo back to her multiplied 100-fold. "I come not to petition, but to propose." A chittering laugh erupted from the Vexler section insectoid, beings whose compound eyes glittered with barely concealed contempt. "A proposal?" hissed Speaker Zixkara, her mandibles clicking in what might have been amusement. "The apes have learned new words." "How delightful." Elena's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but her expression remained neutral. 3 months of diplomatic training on Earth, 6 months of cultural immersion among 17 different species. All of it preparation for this moment. Humanity requests formal recognition of our sovereignty over the Sol system and its adjacent territories, Elena continued. In exchange, we offer full cooperation with Consilium trade regulations, cultural exchange programs, and mutual defense. Mutual defense? The interruption came from Warlord Kruthar, a massive Dravnik whose species had conquered 40 systems before joining the Consilium. His voice was like grinding stone. What possible defense could a species barely capable of faster-than-light travel offer to empires that have mastered reality itself? The chamber filled with sounds of agreement whistles, clicks, harmonic resonances that blended into a symphony of mockery. Elena waited. She had learned patience from watching her grandmother negotiate union contracts in the Detroit auto plants. Let them have their moment, the old woman had said. Pride is a currency that costs nothing to let others spend. When the noise subsided, Elena spoke again. The defense of perspective. Silence fell like a hammer. The arbitrator's eyes rippled again. "Explain. You are 7 species," Elena said, gesturing to the galleries above. 7 unique perspectives, 7 different approaches to problem solving, 7 ways of understanding the universe. Yet you all share one thing: you evolved to dominance on your worlds through conquest, through biological or technological supremacy. She paused, letting her words settle. Humanity evolved through cooperation, not just within our species, but across it. We are divided by language, culture, geography, ideology, and yet we learn to work together anyway. We are specialists in finding common ground where none should exist. "Pretty words," sneered Zixkara. "We have heard thousands of species speak pretty words before their systems were absorbed into ours. Words without power are merely wind. And let me speak of power," Elena replied, and for the first time, steel entered her voice. 3 months ago, the Vexler Mining Consortium attempted to establish operations on Titan without authorization. Your drones ignored 7 warnings, then 10, then 20. You assumed we would capitulate because we could not match your military force. The Vexler speaker's mandibles went still. Instead, Elena continued, we jammed your communications, hacked your navigation systems using protocols you didn't know existed, and convinced your drones they were experiencing cascading system failures. Your entire fleet returned to your staging grounds, believing Titan's atmosphere was incompatible with your technology. The atmospheric composition had not changed, only your perception of it. A low rumble came from somewhere in the Dravnik section. It might have been anger. It might have been laughter. You deceived us? Zixkara's voice rose to a screech. You dare admit to deception before the Consilium? I admit to diplomacy, Elena said calmly. We could have destroyed your drones. We had the capability, but destroying is easy. We chose the harder path, the one that left your hardware intact, your personnel safe, and your dignity mostly preserved. Mostly? The arbitrator leaned forward. Elena allowed herself the smallest smile. Your consortium spent 2 weeks and considerable resources testing Titan-S atmosphere before realizing they'd been outmaneuvered by a species whose most advanced warship is what you would classify as a light frigate. The story has reached at least 40 systems. I understand it's become quite popular in certain entertainment networks. The Kellyan's 4 eyes blinked in perfect sequence, an expression of grudging respect among their kind. In the twilight of the Galactic Council, where nebulae swirled in holographic displays, and the fates of star systems were decided, humanity was but a whisper, a fledgling species barely noticed by the ancient powers that reigned. Our world, Earth, was not our own. We were a protectorate, a designation that sounded benevolent, but tasted of subjugation. Our technology, our culture, our very future was managed by the Galactic Concord, a body dominated by species who saw us as little more than clever primates. And then, everything changed. It all started with Elena. Ambassador Elena Vance was not like the other human delegates who had come before her. They had been petitioners, cap in hand, pleading for scraps of technology or a more lenient trade agreement. Elena was different. She carried the weight of a species yearning to be free, and in her eyes burned the fire of quiet defiance. She had spent years studying the intricate web of galactic politics, learning the unspoken rules, the ancient grudges, and the hidden levers of power. She knew that to gain our sovereignty, we couldn't just ask for it. We had to earn it. We had to prove our worth in a way the galaxy could not ignore. Her opportunity came during the Centaurian Accords, a routine session that had devolved, as it often did, into a shouting match between the Corvith hegemony and the Silicon Collective. For centuries, these two colossal empires had been locked in a cold war, a conflict of ideology and territory that stretched across a dozen star systems. The Corvith were a proud, martial race of insectoids, their society built on a rigid hierarchy and the glory of conquest. The Silicons, by contrast, were crystalline beings of pure logic, a hive mind that saw emotion as a flaw and expansion as a mathematical certainty. Their dispute was over the Genesis Nebula, a stellar nursery rich in rare elements, claimed by both sides through ancient, contradictory treaties. Their endless squabbling had stalled galactic progress for generations. As their ambassadors, a hulking Corvith warlord and a shimmering silicon node traded barbs that threatened to escalate into open conflict. A hush fell over the great chamber. Elena Vance had activated her speaking beacon. All eyes, multifaceted, glowing and otherwise, turned to the small, bipedal figure standing at the human delegation's modest podium. She looked tiny, fragile, yet her voice, when it came, was as clear and steady as a ship's chronometer. "Esteemed members of the Galactic Council," she began, her gaze sweeping across the assembly. "Humanity has listened. We have listened for 50 standard cycles, as the Corvith hegemony and the Silicon Collective have debated the rightful claim to the Genesis Nebula. We have heard arguments of historical precedent, strategic necessity, and divine mandate. And we have seen that these arguments have brought you no closer to resolution. Instead, they have brought you to the brink. A low grumble emanated from the Corvith warlord. A series of discordant chimes echoed from the silicant node. The other council members shifted uncomfortably. For a junior member, a protectorate, to address the council so directly, to lecture two of its most powerful members, was unheard of. It was career suicide. Elena pressed on, undeterred. My people have a saying, you can't see the whole board when you read one of the pieces. Both the Corvith and the Silicants are too close to this conflict, too invested in its history, to see a path forward. What you need is not another arbiter from a species with its own agenda, its own ancient ties and rivalries. What you need is an outside perspective. What you need is a mediator. The chamber buzzed with whispers. A mediator? Who would be so foolish as to step between two such powerful, stubborn empires? Elena let the tension build before delivering her masterstroke. Humanity offers its services as an impartial mediator in the Genesis Nebula dispute. The chamber erupted. Laughter, scorn, disbelief. The representative from the supercilious Valerian star kingdom actually guffawed, its feathery crest quivering with mirth. The primitives wish to mediate, it chirped. They who have yet to master stable wormhole travel. Absurd. The Corvith warlord slammed a massive claw on his console. The humans dare presume to understand Corvith honor? We will not be lectured by a species that still mourns the death of individual soldiers. The silicant node pulsed with cold, analytical light. Its synthesized voice filled the chamber. The probability of a successful outcome, mediated by a species driven by irrational emotion, is calculated at 0.001%. The proposal is illogical. It seemed her gambit had failed. The council was ready to dismiss her, to put the upstart humans back in their place. But Elena hadn't studied galactic politics for nothing. She knew her audience. You are right, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. We are emotional. We are illogical. We are flawed. She looked directly at the Corvith warlord. We understand honor, Ward, because we have fought wars for it, and we have learned the bitter cost of pride. We have seen empires rise and fall on our own small world, fueled by the very same passions that drive you now. Then she turned to the silicant node. And we understand logic, honored node. We created artificial intelligences in our own infancy, and we learned to balance cold calculation with something you may have overlooked: empathy. The ability to understand a perspective that is not your own. It is not illogical. It is a higher form of data processing. A new silence fell over the chamber, this one tinged not with scorn, but with curiosity. We are not a powerful empire, Elena continued, her voice softening. We have no stake in the Genesis Nebula. We have no ancient grudge against the Silicants, no secret alliance with the Corvith. We are neutral, not by political design, but by our very insignificance. And that is our greatest strength. We are the only ones who have nothing to gain, and nothing to lose. She paused, letting the words sink in. Well, almost nothing. This was the moment. The air crackled with anticipation. Humanity will mediate this centuries-old dispute. We will bring a lasting peace to the Genesis Nebula, ensuring prosperity for you both and stability for the entire galaxy. We will do this using our unique blend of logic and empathy, of history and hope. We will succeed where all others have failed. She stood up straighter, her small frame seeming to fill the space. And in exchange for this service, this monumental task that none of you have been able to accomplish, we ask for only one thing. She looked up at the great seal of the Galactic Concord hanging high above the chamber. Our sovereignty. Grant humanity full and unconditional independence. Recognize Earth as a sovereign power, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Let this act be our trial by fire. If we succeed, we are worthy of our freedom. If we fail, She gave a small, wry smile. "Then our fate remains in your hands, and you have lost nothing but a little time." It was a breathtaking, audacious, impossible proposal. A checkmate in 3 moves on a board the size of a galaxy. She had taken their contempt for humanity and turned it into our greatest asset. She had offered the 2 most powerful, stubborn empires in the galaxy a way out of their endless conflict, a way to save face. They wouldn't be backing down to each other. They would be participating in a novel experiment proposed by an insignificant species. The political risk was minimal. The potential reward was galactic peace. The Corvith warlord stared at his silicon adversary. The silicon node analyzed the new data. For the first time in centuries, they were not looking at each other as enemies, but as fellow participants in a scenario they hadn't foreseen. The logic was sound. The appeal to honor was potent. Slowly, deliberately, the Corvith warlord gave a curt nod. The silicon node pulsed a soft, green light, the color of affirmation. Around the council, one by one, other species saw the genius of the play. It was a perfect political solution. It cost them nothing, and could potentially solve their biggest headache. The motion was tabled, seconded, and put to a vote. That day, humanity stepped out of the shadows. We were no longer a protectorate, a footnote in galactic history. We were mediators, diplomats, the unlikely fulcrum upon which the fate of the galaxy now rested. Elena Vance had not just won us a chance at freedom. She had placed humanity at the center of the most important negotiation in 1,000 years. The trials ahead would be immense, the stakes impossibly high. But for the first time in a long time, we had a future that was truly our own. The human era had begun. Thanks for watching this chapter of our story. If you enjoyed this journey into galactic politics and human ingenuity, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tailies from across the cosmos. Let us know in the comments what you think humanity's first move in the negotiations should be. Until next time, keep looking up at the stars. The year is 2472. Humanity, once the sole intelligence we knew, now finds itself a galactic mediator. Our first major case, the war between the Corvith and the Silicons. It wasn't about territory or resources, at least not directly. It was about something far more fundamental, the very definition of life. I was assigned to the diplomatic cruiser, the Horizon, as a xenolinguist. My job was to understand, to translate, not just words, but entire concepts. On one side, we had the Corvith. Imagine giant, graceful mantis-like beings, their bodies a swirling tapestry of bioluminescent light. They communicated through intricate dances of light and subtle pheromonal shifts. For them, consciousness was a continuous, flowing stream of subjective experience. A dream, a memory, a feeling, these were the hallmarks of being. They saw themselves as individuals, each a unique point of light in the cosmic darkness. On the other side were the Silicons. They were crystalline entities, geological in scale. They existed as vast, interconnected networks across entire moons. A single silicon wasn't a crystal you could hold in your hand. It was the entire network. Their consciousness was collective, a distributed intelligence operating on a timescale that made glaciers look hasty. They processed data, calculated outcomes, and existed in a state of pure, cold logic. For them, the individual emotional chaos of the Corvith wasn't consciousness. It was just noise, a biological anomaly. The conflict began on a planet called Xylos. The Corvith had colonized it centuries ago, seeing its vibrant ecosystem as a sacred garden, a place to experience life. The Silicons arrived later, seeing Xylos not as a garden, but as a perfectly stable geological platform to expand their network. They began converting the planet's crust, a process the Corvith viewed as mass murder. To the Silicons, it was simply planetary engineering. They weren't destroying life. They were repurposing inert matter. They saw the screaming, fleeing Corvith not as sentient beings, but as complex chemical reactions. My first meeting was with the Corvith elder, Lyrakai. Her light patterns shimmered with grief and rage. Through the translation matrix, her voice was a symphony of sorrow. "They are extinguishing suns," she pulsed, referring to her people. "They feel nothing. They are a blight, a void where life should be. They don't recognize our pain, our history, our art. How can we coexist with beings who see our souls as mere data points?" Then I connected to the silicon network. There was no single voice. It was like plugging my mind into a library the size of a solar system. The response was immediate, logical, and utterly devoid of malice. "The carbon-based units are inefficient," the network communicated. "Their existence is predicated on unstable emotional states. They claim ownership based on feeling. This is an illogical premise. The planet's structure is optimal for crystalline expansion. Our purpose is to organize, to process, to endure. Their transient, chaotic existence is a deviation from this universal imperative." The Silicans didn't hate the Corvith. You can't hate a rock you're carving. They simply didn't recognize them as peers. To them, a Corvith dying was no different than a river changing its course. It was a physical event, not a tragedy. This was the deadlock. How do you mediate a war when one side doesn't even acknowledge the other side is alive? We couldn't bomb the Silicans. They were a planet. We couldn't reason with the Corvith to abandon their homes. It was like asking us to abandon our very humanity. My breakthrough came from an unexpected place, our own history. I dove into Earth's archives, into the philosophical debates of the 21st century about artificial intelligence. We had once grappled with this same question. When does a complex algorithm become a conscious being? Is it about self-awareness? Emotion? The ability to suffer? We never found a single answer. Instead of trying to prove one side right, I changed our approach. We needed to build a bridge of understanding, not of agreement. My proposal was radical. We would create a simulated reality, a neutral ground where both species could interact on their own terms. For the Corvith, we designed an interface that translated the Silicans' logical processes into something they could perceive. A vast, silent, ever-changing geometric landscape. The data flows became rivers of light. The calculations were mountains rising and falling. They couldn't talk to it, but they could experience its scale, its complexity, its purpose. For the Silicans, we did the opposite. We translated the Corvith's emotional and biological signals into pure data. A Corvith sphere wasn't an emotion. It was a spike in specific neurochemical outputs, a measurable change in energy frequency. Their art wasn't beautiful. It was a complex, non-repeating pattern with a high information density. We brought the two leaders, Lyrakai and the Silicon Prime Node, into this shared simulation. At first, there was nothing. Lyrakai saw a cold, alien world of shifting shapes. The Silicon network simply saw a new, erratic data stream. Then something happened. Lyrakai, in a gesture of desperation, pulsed a pattern of deep grief, the memory of her child lost in the first Silicon attack. In the simulation, this translated into a massive, chaotic energy surge, a disruption in the logical flow of the Silicon landscape. The network's response was, for the first time, not purely analytical. It queried, anomaly detected. The pattern is illogical, inefficient, yet it is self-replicating and causing systemic instability. What is its function? I relayed the question to Lyrakai. She paused, her lights dimming. Its function, she pulsed back, is to remember. To feel. The Silicon network processed this. Feeling. A feedback loop that reinforces memory. Inefficient for data processing, but highly effective for preserving state information in a chaotic system. It was a tiny crack in the wall. The Silicans didn't understand grief, but they understood its function as a data preservation strategy. They began to see the Corvith not as pests, but as a different, albeit inefficient, form of information processing. a form that prioritized memory and individual experience over collective logic. The war didn't end overnight. The negotiations were long and arduous, but the foundation had been laid. The Silicans agreed to halt their expansion on Xylos, reclassifying the Corvith as a unique, high-complexity information system worthy of preservation and study. The Corvith, while still wary, began to see the Silicans not as monsters, but as something profoundly alien, yet not inherently evil. I left the horizon years later, the Xylos Accord a landmark in galactic diplomacy. It taught us the most important lesson in dealing with the unknown. You don't have to agree on what consciousness is, to respect that it might exist in a form you don't understand. Sometimes the most important act of intelligence is to admit the limits of your own definition of it. And in that admission, you find not conflict, but a universe far richer and more wondrous than you ever could have imagined. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this journey, be sure to subscribe for more stories from the frontiers of imagination.
The humans were afraid. That was normal. The humans were determined. That was expected. But the humans were also excited? As if they'd been given not an impossible task, but an irresistible puzzle. And in the cold calculus of galactic politics, that was the most dangerous thing of all. First contact protocols existed for a reason. They were refined over millennia, tested across thousands of species interactions, and designed to minimize the psychological trauma that occurred when fundamentally different forms of consciousness encountered one another. The humans ignored every single one of them. The Corvith homeworld of resonance hung in space like a jewel carved from song itself. Its 3 moons orbited in perfect harmonic resonance, creating gravitational tidal forces that hummed through the planet's crystalline mantle. The Corvith had evolved in caves where emotion literally resonated through the stone. Joy brightened the walls. Sorrow dimmed them. Anger made them vibrate with dangerous frequencies. To be Corvith was to never be alone with one's feelings. Every emotion was shared, amplified, understood without words. Ambassador Tessera stood at the viewport of her orbital habitat, her bioluminescent skin shifting through colors that would have been beautiful to human eyes, but were actually a visual representation of her deep unease. 4 of her sensory tendrils, the organs that allowed her species to feel the emotional landscape of everything around them, were curled tightly against her torso in a protective gesture. The humans were coming. She had reviewed the Consulium's briefing 17 times. Humans were an emotional species that should have made them comprehensible to the Corvith. But the data suggested something far more disturbing. Human emotions were chaotic, contradictory. They could feel joy and sorrow simultaneously. They could lie about their feelings. They could even lie to themselves about their feelings. To Tessera, this was madness. How could a species function when their emotional landscape was so fragmented, so divorced from truth? The CUM system chimed. Ambassador, the human vessel is requesting permission to dock. Tessera's tendrils uncurled slightly. Granted, but maintain full empathic shielding. I will not risk exposure to their emotional chaos without Ambassador. Her aide interrupted, something she would never normally do. The humans are not requesting a formal meeting chamber. They're asking to meet you in, they call it a park? A park? An outdoor recreational space. They've sent specifications for a temporary habitat dome. They want to bring earth plants, earth atmosphere, earth. The aide's colors flickered with confusion. Earth music? For a long moment, Tessera simply stared at the communications console. Then, despite every instinct screaming at her to refuse, she felt something she hadn't experienced in the 600 cycles since this conflict began. Curiosity. Tell them? Yes. 72 hours later, Tessera stood at the entrance to what could only be described as an impossibility. The humans had constructed a biodome on one of her habitat's landing platforms. Inside, she could see green growing things, not the crystalline flora of resonance, but soft, organic plants that swayed in an artificial breeze. There was water. Actual liquid water flowing in a small stream over rounded stones. And there was music, not the emotional resonance of Corvith song, but something structured, mathematical, and yet somehow still moving. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the dome's entrance, wearing what appeared to be casual clothing rather than formal diplomatic attire. "Ambassador Tisara," Elena said, and to the Corvith's surprise, she attempted the traditional gesture of greeting, tendrils extended, colors showing openness and respect. The human couldn't actually change colors, but she'd painted her hands with pigments that created a reasonable approximation. "You studied our customs," Tisara said, her own tendrils extending cautiously. "We studied everything we could find," Elena admitted, which honestly wasn't nearly enough. "The Consulium's records focus mostly on your military capabilities and territorial claims. Very little about your culture, your art, your philosophy." She gestured to the dome. "We thought perhaps we could start by sharing a little of ours. Would you join me?" Every diplomatic protocol Tisara had ever learned said to refuse. Maintain formal distance. Establish clear boundaries. Never allow an opponent to control the environment of negotiation. But as her tendrils reached out, feeling the emotional resonance emanating from the dome, she sensed something that shocked her. Peace. Genuine, uncomplicated peace. And underneath it, like a subtle harmony, hope. "I will join you," she said. Inside the dome, the air was warm and carried scents Tisara had never encountered. Growing things. Moisture, something the human called lavender. Elena led her to a bench near the stream, and they sat. For a long moment, neither spoke. The water bubbled. The music played, something soft, with strings and gentle percussion. Tisara's tendrils relaxed despite herself. "Why am I here, Ambassador Vasquez?" she finally asked. "The Consulium sent you to mediate our dispute with the Silicans. Yet you invite me to a garden to listen to music." "This is not negotiation." "No," Elena agreed. "It's not. It's something we humans do before negotiation. We call it establishing common ground." She picked up a smooth stone from beside the stream. 600 years you've been locked in conflict with the Silicans. 600 years of failed mediations. Can I ask you something personal?" Tisara's colors flickered with caution, but she nodded. "Have you ever actually met a Silicant?" The question hit like a physical blow. Tisara's tendrils curled involuntarily. No. No Corvith has. Not since the first contact incident. We cannot. You do not understand what it is like for us. When we extend our senses toward them, there is nothing. A void where consciousness should be. It is like standing at the edge of an abyss. It is terrifying, Elena finished softly. I know. You cannot know. You cannot empathic. You cannot feel the absence. You're right, Elena interrupted gently. I can't feel it the way you do. But I can understand it. She held up the stone. Do you know what humans are afraid of more than anything else, Ambassador? More than death, more than pain, more than physical harm? Tisara's colors shifted to questioning blue-green. Loneliness, Elena said. The feeling of being completely, utterly alone, of reaching out and finding no one there, of speaking into the void and hearing no answer. She set the stone down carefully. When you reach out to the Silicants and feel nothing, you experience the thing that terrifies us most. You feel alone. Tisara was silent. Her tendrils trembled slightly.
In the vast, silent expanse of the cosmos, two civilizations teetered on the brink of war. The Corvith, a species of profound empaths, communicated through shared feelings, their society a vibrant tapestry of emotional connection. Then there were the Silicants, beings of pure, crystalline logic, whose existence was defined by data, probability, and unassailable reason. For centuries, their territories had expanded, inching closer until their borders finally touched. And that's when the trouble began. To the Corvith, the Silicants were a terrifying void, a silent, unfeeling abyss where emotion should be. Contact with them was like staring into nothingness, a psychic cold that threatened to extinguish their own inner light. They perceived the Silicants' logical expansion as a soulless plague, consuming worlds without passion or purpose. Fear, the most primal of emotions, began to fester, turning into a collective cry for self-preservation, for a preemptive strike to eliminate the void before it swallowed them whole. To the Silicants, the Corvith were an incomprehensible storm of chaos. Their society, driven by fleeting emotions, seemed erratic, unpredictable, and dangerously unstable. The Corvith's passionate outbursts and shifting alliances were variables that defied logical modeling. They saw the empaths as a systemic threat, a chaotic force that could unravel the predictable order of the galaxy. Their conclusion was simple and direct. To ensure galactic stability, the anomaly known as the Corvith must be neutralized. War was not a desire. It was a logical imperative. Into this crucible of misunderstanding came a small, unassuming vessel from a nascent spacefaring race, humanity. On board were two of its finest diplomats, Elena Vasquez and Yuki Tanaka. They weren't soldiers or scientists. They were communicators, specialists in the delicate art of bridging divides. Their mission, deemed impossible by many, was to mediate a peace between beings who couldn't even agree on the nature of existence. They knew this wasn't about negotiating territory or resources. This was about something far more fundamental. Elena and Yuki began their work not by proposing treaties, but by listening. They spent weeks with the Corvith, immersing themselves in their world of shared emotion. They learned to interpret the subtle shifts in the collective consciousness, feeling the currents of joy, sorrow, and the ever-present fear of the silicon void. Elena, with her natural warmth and intuitive grace, found she could resonate with their empathic field, translating their profound anxieties into words. She didn't dismiss their fear. She validated it, showing them that another species could at least begin to comprehend their terror of the unfeeling abyss. Simultaneously, Yuki Tanaka interfaced with the Silicants. It was a starkly different experience. Communication wasn't through feeling, but through pure data streams, intricate light patterns, and complex mathematical constructs. Yuki, a master of logic and systems thinking, met them on their own terms. He didn't argue against their conclusion that the Corvith were chaotic. Instead, he introduced new data. He presented models of human history, full of illogical wars and irrational acts of kindness, demonstrating that chaotic systems could still achieve stability and even progress. He wasn't trying to make them feel. He was trying to make them compute a different outcome. The first breakthrough was small, almost imperceptible. While with the Corvith, Elena projected a simple human feeling, curiosity. Not fear, not aggression, but a genuine desire to understand. She translated this into the Corvith empathic language, a gentle, questioning pulse. She explained that what they perceived as a void might not be empty, but simply different. A different kind of existence, operating on principles they had yet to grasp. The idea was radical, a tiny seed of doubt planted in a forest of fear. Meanwhile, Yuki presented the Silicants with a paradox. If their goal was to ensure order, then total war against a chaotic but resilient species like the Corvith would introduce the highest possible degree of unpredictability into the galactic system. The war itself would be a source of chaos far greater than the Corvith's existence. The most logical path, he argued, was not elimination, but containment and study. This reframing, from threat to be neutralized to complex system to be analyzed, resonated with the Silicants' core programming. For the first time, they paused their war preparations. The human diplomats then arranged the first-ever joint communication session. It wasn't a face-to-face meeting, which would have been disastrous. Instead, Elena and Yuki acted as living translators, as a bridge between two realities. The Corvith projected their overwhelming fear. Elena didn't just translate the word fear. She filtered it, broke it down. She described it to Yuki as a high probability forecast of species-wide termination due to the presence of an unreadable, unpredictable entity. Yuki fed this refined, data-centric definition to the Silicans. Suddenly, the Corvith's chaos wasn't just random noise. It was a logical response to an existential threat. The Silicans processed this. Their response was a cascade of light patterns. Yuki translated it for Elena. The assertion is illogical. Our presence is governed by predictable patterns. We pose no threat, only order. Elena received this and knew a direct translation would sound cold and dismissive to the Corvith. So she reshaped it. They do not understand why you feel fear, she projected to the Corvith. Their existence is so different, they cannot perceive their own effect on you. They see themselves not as a void, but as a perfect, predictable pattern. Their lack of feeling is not malice. It is simply their nature. This was the turning point. For the Corvith, the idea that the void wasn't an act of aggression, but a state of being was revolutionary. The fear didn't vanish, but its sharp, hateful edge began to soften, replaced by a flicker of bewilderment and even pity. The Silicans, in turn, integrated the new data point. Their order was being perceived as a threat. This was an inefficiency in their interaction with the galaxy. The problem was no longer the Corvith's chaos, but a failure in mutual data exchange. The mission objective shifted from neutralize anomaly to correct communication error. Elena and Yuki spent months acting as this human filter. They helped the Corvith create emotional data packets, translating their complex feelings into structured forms the Silicans could analyze. They helped the Silicans create logical empathy models, simulations that allowed them to predict the Corvith's emotional responses to their actions, even if they couldn't feel them. The two races began to communicate, albeit indirectly, through the shared language of humanity. The Corvith learned to see the Silicans not as a void, but as a silent, intricate piece of music, beautiful in its mathematical precision. The Silicans learned to see the Corvith not as chaos, but as a complex, dynamic weather system, unpredictable, yet possessing its own internal logic and patterns. They didn't learn to feel like the Corvith, nor did the Corvith learn to think like the Silicans. They didn't need to. They simply learned to acknowledge the validity of the other's existence. The threat of war receded, not because a treaty was signed, but because the very reason for the war had become irrelevant. The dispute was a symptom of misunderstanding, and by treating the cause, the humans had made the conflict obsolete. Elena Vasquez and Yuki Tanaka's greatest achievement was not in crafting the perfect peace accord. It was in teaching two vastly different peoples a simple, universal truth. You don't have to be the same to coexist. You just have to be willing to see the universe through another's eyes. In the quiet that followed, a new kind of galactic society began to form, one built not on assimilation or conquest, but on the profound and beautiful act of understanding. And at its center were the unlikely mediators, the emotional logicians, the humans. The Corvith and Silicant representatives had not looked at each other, had not acknowledged each other's presence. 600 years of mutual incomprehension hung in that gap like a physical barrier. The arbitrator's four eyes rippled in sequence. Ambassador Vasquez, you requested this emergency session, claiming breakthrough progress. The Consulem is skeptical. Proceed. Elena took a slow breath. Everything came down to this moment. Honored members of the Consulium, she began. For 600 years, you have attempted to mediate the dispute between the Corvith and the Silicans by focusing on the territorial question of Saros Deep. All have failed. We are aware of our own history. Warlord Kruthar rumbled. Do you intend to lecture us on our failures, or present your solution? Neither, Elena said. Because there is no solution to the question you've been asking. The dispute isn't really about Saros Deep at all. Murmurs rippled through the galleries. The arbitrator leaned forward. Explain. Saros Deep is a symbol, Elena continued. It represents something far more fundamental. The question of whether consciousness defined by emotion or consciousness defined by logic has greater validity. They're fighting over who gets to be right about the nature of existence itself. This is known. Zixkara chittered impatiently. Which is precisely why the conflict is unsolvable. You're absolutely correct, Elena said. They can't be negotiated. But they don't need to be. She gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. What if I told you that both the Corvith and the Silicans are right? What if the real question isn't which one is correct, but what each one can see that the other cannot? Dr. James Carter stepped forward. The Corvith perceive reality through empathic resonance. They sense emotional truth. The Silicans perceive reality through pattern recognition and logical analysis. They see mathematical relationships. Yuki Tanabe joined him. We ran an experiment. We presented both species with the same complex problem, predicting the behavior of a developing star system. The hologram shifted. The Silicans created a computational model of extraordinary precision, Yuki continued. Their analysis was 94% accurate. The Corvith approached it completely differently, Dr. Carter said. They couldn't calculate the mathematics, but they sensed the emotional resonance of the system. They felt which configurations were harmonious, which were discordant. Superstition, Archon 7's voice echoed. Is it? Elena asked. Because when we combined both approaches, the accuracy jumped to 99.7%. The Corvith were detecting real patterns that the Silicans' models were missing. The chamber fell silent. You are suggesting, the arbitrator said slowly, that the Corvith and Silicans are not opposites, but complements? I'm not suggesting it, Elena replied. I'm demonstrating it. She turned to Tessara. Ambassador, please tell the Consilium what you experienced. Tessara's tendrils curled. The human mediators asked me to sense the emotional resonance of sorrow's deep itself. I felt discord, chaos, something fundamentally unstable. The humans then showed me the silicate analysis of the same system, Tessara admitted. Their calculations indicated that the gravitational anomaly is not stable. She turned to Archon 7. And you are being asked to work with beings whose behavior you cannot predict. To trust in chaos. Illogical, Archon 7 stated. But its hologram had stabilized. Was that the computational equivalent of consideration? Maybe, Elena agreed. But here's the thing about humanity. We've been doing the impossible for our entire existence. We are both emotional and logical. We are empathic and analytical. We contain multitudes that shouldn't be able to coexist, and yet we do. Not despite our contradictions, but because of them. She walked forward, positioning herself directly between the Corvith and Silicant representatives. You don't have to like each other, she said quietly. You don't have to understand each other. You don't even have to stop being afraid of each other. But you need to recognize that what you fear in the other is precisely what you need to become. Complete. Dr. Carter activated another display, this one showing human brain scans, neural pathways lighting up in complex patterns. This is a human brain processing a complex problem, he explained. Watch what happens. The logical centers activate calculation, analysis, pattern recognition. But simultaneously, the emotional centers engage intuition, empathy, aesthetic appreciation. We don't choose one or the other. We use both in constant dialogue, each informing and enhancing the other. You are biological, Archon 7 observed. This integration is inherent to your neural architecture. We are synthetic. The Corvith are empathic specialists. We cannot simply rewire our fundamental nature. You don't have to rewire, Yuki said. You just have to communicate. Share data. Learn to translate your different languages of consciousness into forms the other can use. That's what we're offering, not to solve the territorial dispute, but to teach you how to bridge the gap between your different ways of being. Elena pulled out a small device, a data crystal that glowed with soft blue light. This contains the complete framework for what we're calling the Dual Consciousness Protocol. It's a system for Corvith and Silicon cooperation that doesn't require either species to change who they are. Instead, it creates translation layers, communication bridges, collaborative structures that let both of you contribute your unique strengths to shared problems. She held the crystal up so the entire chamber could see it. Sorrow's deep belongs to whoever claims it according to Consilium law. We're not here to arbitrate that. But what we're offering is worth far more than one dying star system. We're offering you the blueprint for the galaxy's first truly hybrid consciousness collaboration. A partnership that could revolutionize science, exploration, problem-solving, everything. The arbitrator's 4 eyes fixed on the crystal, then on Elena, then on the 2 representatives who stood separated by 3 meters and 600 years of misunderstanding. Ambassador Tissara, the arbitrator said, do you accept this framework? Every being in the chamber held their breath, or its equivalent. Tissara's colors cycled through every hue in the Corvith emotional spectrum: fear purple, doubt gray, hope green, and finally, settling into a shade that meant courage-determination-leap-of-faith. I cannot feel the Silicon's consciousness, she said slowly. Perhaps I never will. But I felt the truth in the stellar resonance data. I felt the accuracy of our combined analysis. And I feel, she paused, I feel that my fear of the void has blinded me to what might exist within it. She extended one tendril, reaching out across that 3-meter gap. I accept. Every eye in the chamber turned to Archon 7. The hologram flickered, stabilized, flickered again. Probability matrices indicate 73% chance of successful collaboration, Archon 7 stated. But probability matrices also indicated 0% chance of the Corvith agreeing to joint operations. Human unpredictability has corrupted our predictive models. A pause that lasted exactly 2.7 seconds. Perhaps, Archon 7 continued, it is time to acknowledge that some variables cannot be calculated in advance. Some outcomes can only be discovered through experience. Some leaps must be taken on. Insufficient data. The hologram extended a projection, a line of light, reaching across the space between them. We accept. The tendril and the light touched. And in that moment, in that simple connection between beings who should never have been able to understand each other, something impossible happened. The chamber erupted in chaos, some species cheering, others protesting, many simply stunned into silence. But Elena barely heard it. She was watching. Tissara's face, as the ambassador's colors, shifted to a shade that had no human equivalent, but which every species in the chamber recognized. Wonder. I still cannot feel their consciousness, Tissara whispered. But I can feel their willingness to reach across the void. And perhaps that is enough. The Consilium had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years on the principle that power determined order. The strong dominated. The weak submitted. This was natural law. But in that moment, watching 2 species who had been locked in hatred learn to extend hands or tendrils, or light across impossible divides, something shifted in the cosmic order. The humans had not solved the dispute through superior firepower. They had not negotiated a compromise through clever tactics. They had done something far more dangerous. They had changed what both sides wanted, and the galaxy would never be quite the same. 3 months after the impossible handshake, the galaxy held its breath. The arbitrator stood before the assembled Consilium, its 4 eyes focused on Ambassador Elena Vasquez. The Corvith Silicon Alliance has exceeded all projections, it announced. 7 new energy systems discovered. 12 joint research stations established. 0 conflicts. Silence filled the chamber. Humanity has fulfilled its contract. The Consilium recognizes Earth's full sovereignty and grants membership status. Elena nodded, accepting what should have been her greatest triumph. But her eyes held something else. We accept, she said quietly. With one request. The arbitrator's eyes rippled. Speak the dual consciousness protocol. Share it with every species, freely. That knowledge is worth everything, Elena interrupted. Which is why it should belong to everyone. We didn't come to the stars to build an empire. We came to build bridges. For a long moment, the arbitrator studied her. Then, for the first time in recorded history, it bowed. Welcome to the Consilium, Ambassador. Welcome to the galaxy. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human. If this story moved you, remember, humanity's greatest strength isn't in our weapons or technology. It's in our ability to see the value in those different from us, and to build bridges where others see only voids.